Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 227, Lady Xiao, the Imperial Noble Consort 4. For a moment the entire rear garden was dyed in hostility. Mok Jiangun's words were shocking enough to stun not only Lady Xiao but everyone present. This was also true for the Heaven and Earth Society's advance party, who could be considered to be on the same side. Ganyang, the leader of the advance party, couldn't hide his bafflement, his eyes going wide. What the hell is he trying to do? He had thought Mok Jiangun had some sort of plan when he said he had something to say to Lady Xiao. But he never imagined that plan would be a threat that was beyond his own comprehension. And to none other than Lady Xiao, one of the four great evils who held sway over the power in this nation and the mother of the crown prince. He's lost his mind. A threat needs to have some degree of plausibility. Only then can you induce the other party to act according to your intentions. But if you suddenly escalate the scale like this, the consequences will also become unmanageable. How did he intend to handle the situation after making such a threat? In the past it might have been different, but provoking the current Lady Xiao like this is dangerous. She wasn't just called the center of power in name only. If she set her mind to it, she could move the emperor. If that happened, the enraged emperor could mobilize the imperial army or the orthodox faction to pressure the Heaven and Earth Society. Thus, Ganyang was concerned that the situation would take a turn for the worst. As expected, Lady Xiao seemed greatly angered, her beautiful brows twisting fiercely. It would be strange not to be angry after being blatantly threatened. At that moment the leader of Eastern Depot shouted in anger. "You bastard! How dare a lowly servant like you spout such nonsense? If you don't immediately kowtow and beg Her Majesty for forgiveness, I'll exterminate you and your entire clan." "Leader!" Lady Xiao cut off his pressing. "Your Majesty." "But..." "Leader." As her voice rose, the leader immediately shut his mouth. Oh. Interest flashed in Mok Jiangun's eyes. He had naturally assumed she would find it hard to contain her anger or be thrown into confusion by his direct threat. But unexpectedly, despite her anger, she didn't lose her composure. It seemed she hadn't risen to that position with just her beauty alone. After stopping the leader, Lady Xiao opened her mouth. "What is your name?" At her question, Mok Jiangun replied nonchalantly. "It's Mok Jiangun." "Mok Jiangun. I see, Mok Jiangun. Are you not afraid of the consequences after daring to threaten me like this?" "Consequences? I don't know how outstanding your martial arts are, but the leader here and Magistrate Peng are also formidable experts. And it's not just them. Outside there are experts from the renowned martial clan of the Orthodox faction, the Hebei Ping family, along with hundreds of soldiers. Experts from the Hebei Ping family have also come to provide support?" At these words, it was Ganyang who swallowed dryly instead. It seemed Lady Xiao was determined to sever ties with them today. Judging by how thoroughly she had prepared. If they made even a small misstep, this place could very well become their grave today. Yet Mok Jiangun replied indifferently. "You've prepared quite diligently." At this reaction one of her eyebrows twitched. "You're quite an arrogant and presumptuous fellow. I don't know if you have guts of steel or if you're that confident in your own abilities, but let me tell you what will happen from now on." "And what would that be?" "Make sure to keep your word about killing everyone." "Pardon? If you happen to fail at that, the consequences won't end with just your head. Not only you but all your related clan members will be exterminated. Furthermore, we will hold the Heaven and Earth Society where you belong responsible for this incident." "Oh no." At Lady Xiao's words, the expressions of Ganyang and the others from the Heaven and Earth Society darkened. They had thought she would at least waver a bit in the face of the threat, but instead she launched a cold counterattack. Holding the Heaven and Earth Society responsible? If everything she said actually came to pass and they failed to kill everyone here, they would face the worst-case scenario. This made all of them worried. No matter how outstanding Mok Jiangun's martial prowess was, the forces Lady Xiao had prepared also seemed formidable. Swish. Watching their reactions, Lady Xiao poured herself a cup of alcohol and spoke. "Do you now grasp the reality before your eyes? So I shall bestow mercy and give you one last chance." "A chance?" "Yes. Whether you seize this chance or not will determine if my wrath extends to the Heaven and Earth Society or not. I'm quite curious about that." You're curious? Then I'll tell you. You dared to utter disrespectful words that should never be spoken to me, so I cannot overlook that sin. Thus, first cut out that presumptuous tongue of yours. And then take your own life. If you do so, I will not hold your companions or your family and the Heaven and Earth Society responsible. With those words, Lady Xiao raised the corners of her mouth sharply and downed the cup in one go. Gulp. A mere thug from the martial world dared to threaten her? Since the time you started crawling, she had been surviving in this cruel and cold imperial palace, eliminating countless enemies and rivals. Did they think someone like her would lose her reason and be swayed by such a threat? So they were mistaken. I am the one who survived on the thin ice of the imperial palace, where I could lose my life at any moment and reach this position. If you try to provoke me half-heartedly, I'll show you what price you'll pay. It was at that very moment. Heh. Lady Xiao's right eyebrow shot up. Laughing. It was absurd. She had tried to make him realize how precariously he was walking on a tightrope, but he was laughing in this situation. Moreover, that laughter was clearly closer to a sneer. You dare. Ah, my apologies. Your Majesty's begging was so amusing. What? Begging? It's quite interesting to see you go on, pleading with the very enemy you've turned against to take his own life. With those words, Mok Jiangun's face split into a grin that seemed to reach his ears. That expression, filled with malice, sent a chill down Lady Xiao's spine for a moment. She wasn't the only one who felt this sensation. This bastard is dangerous. They had simply thought of him as an impudent fellow. The leader of Eastern Depot instinctively felt an eerie sense of danger from Mok Jiangun. So much so that he resolved not to simply subdue him, but to kill him no matter what through a collaborative attack. Thus, the leader signaled Ping Yiman beside him with his eyes. To attack immediately. It was at that very moment. Swish. Mok Jiangun, who had been sitting in his seat and sneering, vanished as if scattering. What? As he disappeared from their sight, everyone hurriedly scanned their surroundings. This was true even for the leader and Ping Yiman, the most outstanding experts among Lady Xiao's close associates. They had already been fully prepared to fight Mok Jiangun from the start. For him to disappear even from their view, just how fast was he? It was at that instant. Startled. Sensing a faint presence and unease behind him, the leader hurriedly launched a claw technique towards his back. Sunflower hanging claw, fifth technique, dancing lotus swift. Smack. It was a technique that struck the opponent targeting one's back with the elbow and launched a claw strike to the face. But before he could even fully turn his body, thud. His elbow was blocked by something like a palm, making it impossible to turn his body. He tried to launch his body forward to create distance, but thwack. Ugh. With the impact striking his waist, the leader let out a dying scream as he was sent flying forward, crashing into the rear garden's wall. Boom. Rumble. The impact was so strong that the wall crumbled and the roof tiles above collapsed. Leader. You bastard. Having pinpointed Mok Jiangun's location thanks to the leader, Peng Yiman gathered inner energy in his hand and unleashed a saber technique. It was the fourth technique of the 5 tiger saber style, the saber piercing strongly. The saber energy, split into 5 trajectories, targeted the top of the head, neck, both shoulders and chest with unparalleled speed. Swish 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 swish. At that moment Mok Jiangun also responded with a saber technique. It was the 7th technique of the Flying Phantom Saber art, the Flashing Shadow Swift Saber. Originally, the Flashing Shadow Swift Saber was literally a swift saber strike that made the saber energy appear like flashing shadows. But the way it was unleashed by the Shadow Clan Master was quite different. That was because, clang 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 clang, Mok Jiangun's hand seemed to be motionless, yet Peng Yiman's saber energy, which had been rushing in 5 split trajectories, was simultaneously deflected. At speed. The outcome of a swift saber duel depended on speed. But Peng Yiman's saber technique couldn't even compare to Mok Jiangun's. This went beyond the difference between walking and running. Thanks to that, Peng Yiman's right hand was thrown upward. Mok Jiangun then penetrated the opening, grabbing his left arm with the capturing arhat hand technique and twisting it behind his back while pressing down on his right shoulder. Thud. Arg. Thump. As 5 fingers dug into the pressed right shoulder, Peng Yiman let out a groan of pain and fell to one knee. Peng Yiman, who had been subdued with a single move after just one exchange, realized with certainty. It's futile. If this bastard seriously unleashed his abilities, not only himself and the leader but even if everyone joined forces, they wouldn't be able to sweep him away. He was a monster to that extent. And this monstrous fellow was just a disciple of an executive at the sect master level of the Heaven and Earth Society? It was unbelievable. With this level of martial prowess, he wasn't at the late-stage disciple level but comparable to an executive at the Five Kings level of the Heaven and Earth Society or an elder of the Nine Sects and One Clan, the major factions of the orthodox martial world. At that moment, Mok Jiongun said to Lady Seo, "Your Majesty, it seems you had high expectations for them." Tremble, tremble. At Mok Jiongun's provocation, the hand holding the alcohol cup trembled. Even though she wasn't well-versed in martial arts, she could tell that the leader and Ping Yiman, her close associates, were no match for that fellow. Lady Seo bit her lip hard and glared at the eunuch Yubong. "Don't worry. Although he's stronger than me, Sir Peng will easily subdue him." Easily subdue him? She hadn't completely trusted that eunuch's words. But she had thought that since the people sent by the Heaven and Earth Society were just young late-stage disciples, they would be no match for an expert like Ping Yiman, who had years of experience and a reputation in the martial world. However, her expectations had been completely overturned. Can the reinforcements really subdue that fellow even if they come? There was a saying that even the strongest couldn't win against numbers. She had also thought so. But strangely enough, she had a bad feeling. Would that proverb really apply to an overwhelmingly powerful being like him? It's still uncertain how things will turn out. But, having fought and survived against numerous enemies in the Imperial Palace for a long time, her instincts had become much more sensitive than ordinary people's. That sensitivity had given her deep insight, allowing her to survive and rise to the top. At this rate, the loss may be even greater. Her instincts were strongly telling her to stop right now. Thus, enough. She raised her voice loudly for everyone to hear. Then she gestured to the warriors surrounding the Heaven and Earth Society to back off. The warriors, who had been hesitating on what to do, simultaneously retreated. Lady Seo then spoke in a calm voice. "You said your name was Mok Jiongun?" "Yes. Despite not even being in your prime, you have truly astonishing martial prowess." Clap, clap, clap. Lady Seo clapped her hands and continued speaking in a somewhat softened voice as if admiring him. "For even the leader and magistrate Ping to be no match for you. It seems I underestimated you due to my lack of discernment." Her plan was simple. After acknowledging him and praising him to a certain extent, she would naturally wrap up this escalated situation. It was the only way to resolve the matter without losing face as the imperial noble consort. If she concluded things well here, regardless of the outcome, she could end it with an image of her conceding and showing magnanimity. So if she properly admonished him, it was at that very moment. Crack. Arg. Lady Seo hurriedly turned her head away from the gruesome sight unfolding before her eyes. That was because Mok Jiongun had torn off Ping Yiman's right arm from the shoulder he had been pressing down on. If this fellow isn't crazy. For a moment she was at a loss for words, finding it absurd. She had tried to resolve the situation by conceding, but what the hell was this? As she was baffled, Mok Jiongun smiled and said, after acknowledging him and praising him to a certain extent, she would naturally wrap up this escalated situation. It was the only way to resolve the matter without losing face as the imperial noble consort. If she concluded things well here, regardless of the outcome, she could end it with an image of her conceding and showing magnanimity. So if she properly admonished him, it was at that very moment. Crack. Arg. Lady Seo hurriedly turned her head away from the gruesome sight unfolding before her eyes. That was because Mok Jiongun had torn off Ping Yiman's right arm from the shoulder he had been pressing down on. If this fellow isn't crazy. For a moment she was at a loss for words, finding it absurd. She had tried to resolve the situation by conceding, but what the hell was this? As she was baffled, Mok Jiongun smiled and said, Chapter 228, Desire, 1. Mok Jiongun wrapped his arm around the neck of Ping Yiman, a close associate of Lady Seo. And he tried to twist his neck right then and there. At that moment Lady Seo, who had been confused and unsure of what to do, screamed in a voice close to a shriek. Stop. At this, Mok Jiongun, who had been about to break his neck without hesitation, stopped at the last moment. Sir Peng. Just then the leader of Eastern Depot, who had crashed into the wall from Mok Jaeongun's attack, staggered out, unable to hide his shock. Although he had dramatically prevented Ping Iman from losing his life, he knew better than anyone what this outcry meant. How could this happen? For Lady Xiao to show weakness first. At this rate, they would have no choice but to be dragged into the situation the bastard wanted. As expected, Lady Xiao, with tears welling up in her eyes, spoke to Mok Jaeongun. I have lost. So please stop. At her words, the warriors were in an uproar. It was unthinkable for Lady Xiao, the mother of the crown prince and one of the four great evils who held sway over the power in this nation, to admit defeat to a mere martial artist. In the end, those with deep loyalty who couldn't just stand by and watch this tried to dissuade her weakened state. Your Majesty. This cannot be. Please take back your words. They cried out, Your Majesty, almost to the point of wailing. How could she submit to such a thug-like fellow? It was absolutely unacceptable. Thus, despite not receiving any orders, several warriors launched themselves towards Mok Jaeongun. How dare you threaten Her Majesty? Die. At that moment, two people blocked the path of the charging warriors. They were none other than Siep Chun, the third guard captain of the Heaven and Earth Society's main sect, and Mong Muyak, the son of the vice leader. Clang 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 clang. Ah, what? The weapons. Siep Chun instantly broke or deflected the weapons of the three attacking warriors with his inner energy-imbued hand blade. Mong Muyak easily dodged the swords of two people with his excellent lightness skill, then sealed their acupoints, rendering them unable to move. Thud thud thud. No matter how outstanding they were only at the first-rate level. There was no way they could handle two individuals who had reached the transcendent realm and were called the Five Tigers, the pinnacle of the Heaven and Earth Society's late-stage disciples. Siep Chun raised his voice and issued a chilling warning to the warriors whose weapons he had broken. If you target my lord, next time I'll sever your necks, not your weapons. Damn it. Overwhelmed by Siep Chun's aura, they took involuntary steps back, trembling. Thanks to that, the observing warriors could tell. Not only Mok Jaeongun but each and every one of the late-stage disciples sent by the Heaven and Earth Society was an overwhelmingly powerful expert they couldn't handle. No. The warriors are losing morale. The leader of Eastern Depot, who had been regaining his strength through breath control, was in a difficult position. Although he and Ping Iman were no match for the fellow, the situation would change once the experts and soldiers from the Ping family arrived. It was too early to give up. Wait. What's this? The leader frowned and looked outside the rear garden. Suddenly something felt off. It seemed quite some time had passed since Ping Iman blew the whistle to signal for help. So why hadn't the reinforcements arrived yet? If the distance was far it would be understandable, but at most they should have been on standby right outside the restaurant. But it was taking too long for that. Could it be? The leader glanced at the Heaven and Earth Society side with trembling eyes. Just then Lady Xiao, whose trembling had somewhat subsided, pressed the warriors. Everyone stop. No one is to act until I give the order. Having admonished them, Lady Xiao spoke to Mok Jaeongun. What they did just now stemmed from their loyalty. So please understand. At her words, Mok Jaeongun smiled and replied, I'm not so lacking in understanding. Grip. Biting her lip hard, she suppressed her turbulent emotions to the point where her hands and feet trembled and spoke again. I will grant all of your requests, so let's end this here. Why, Your Majesty? You mustn't. At her words, someone opposed vehemently. It was Ping Iman, whose neck was being held by Mok Jaeongun's arm. Despite being on the verge of death, he couldn't just stand by and watch this situation. Your Majesty. The Ping family and the Righteous Alliance will protect you from this wicked Heaven and Earth Society no matter what. You must never give in to their demands. Crack. Ack. Before he could even finish speaking, Peng Iman's neck was twisted, and his body went limp with a dying scream. Anyone could tell his breath had ceased. In an instant the rear garden was engulfed in silence. Everyone had thought that since Lady Xiao had admitted defeat and submitted first, at least no one else would die. But Ping Iman, who could be considered Lady Xiao's left arm, had absurdly lost his life. This was a shock in itself. What? Why? Lady Xiao's close associate. Even the Heaven and Earth Society side, who could be considered to be on the same side, was surprised. Although it was a somewhat extreme method, they thought there was no need for further sacrifices since Lady Sio's side had surrendered first. But they couldn't understand why he was escalating the situation further. At that moment, Lady Sio, who had been speechless with shock at Ping Iman's death, screamed with bulging veins in her neck. "Why, how dare you? It's not about daring." "What?" "Grip." At that instant, Lady Sio's eyes widened like crazy. It was because of what was unfolding before her eyes. Crunch. Crack. The sound of bones being crushed and flesh being torn tortured her eardrums, and her eyes witnessed Ping Iman's head being ripped from his body. The anger that had gripped her vanished without a trace at the sight of such a cruel scene. This fellow isn't in his right mind. Crunch. Squish. Mok Jae-eun threw Ping Iman's head, which he had completely separated from the body, onto the table in the pavilion where Lady Sio was. Thud. Roll roll. Eeyawa. The palace maids beside Lady Sio screamed at the horrific sight. Amidst the screaming and trembling maids, Lady Sio staggered and was about to collapse. She had already lost her mind at the sight of Ping Iman's head rolling on the table. "Ugh! Your Majesty!" Pat. The eunuch Yubong, who was right in front of the pavilion, hurriedly leaped up to support her as she was about to collapse. Along with that, Yubong kicked Ping Iman's head, which was on the table, into the pond near the pavilion with a bitter expression. "Sir Peng. My apologies." Splash. Peng Iman's head sank into the pond like that. The eyes of all those watching were filled with shock and fear. The warriors who had been enraged when Peng Iman died were now gripped by fear and a sense of overwhelming pressure, not knowing what to do. He's crazy. To rip off the head of someone who was already dead. It was unspeakably cruel. Amidst this, Mok Jae-eun licked the back of his blood-soaked hand with his tongue and raised the corners of his mouth sharply. At that sight, everyone felt a chill run down their spine. The sight of him tasting blood and laughing was truly like an evil demon. Step. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun took a step. It was in the direction of the pavilion where Lady Sio was. Seeing this, Lady Sio, who had been on the verge of losing consciousness from shock, cried out in disgust. "Stop him! Stop him!" There were 4 warriors near the pavilion, but none of them moved at Lady Sio's command. Already overcome by fear and terror, they couldn't control their trembling bodies. However, not everyone was like that. "Don't you dare touch Her Majesty." Pat. The leader of Eastern Depot, having somewhat recovered his strength through breath control, launched himself to block Mok Jae-eun. But Seop Chun intercepted him. "Where do you think you're going? Get out of the way." Thud 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 thud. The two exchanged about 2 moves worth of attacks and defenses on the spot in an instant. Originally, if they were to properly fight, the leader would have the upper hand in terms of inner energy, but thanks to the injury he had suffered from Mok Jae-eun, their exchange was neck and neck. Damn it! To this young lad. His mind growing impatient, the leader's hands became even more tangled, unable to break through. Thus, thud. Lady Sio pushed away the eunuch Yubong who had been supporting her and shouted, "Stop him! I said stop him!" Pushed forward as if by her command, Yubong was at a loss inwardly. He had already been defeated with a single move when he faced Mok Jae-eun before, and he had witnessed with his own eyes that even Ping Iman and the leader who were better than him were no match. So how was he supposed to stop him? Damn it! Yubong's eyes trembled like crazy as he looked at the approaching Mok Jae-eun. Just half an hour ago it seemed like everything would go well. But how could everything collapse like this? Step. Mok Jae-eun approached right in front of him. Yubong repeated inwardly, "I have to stop him. I have to stop him." Even if he knew the outcome, Lady Sio had given the order, so he had to carry it out. But his hands and feet wouldn't listen. The moment his eyes met Mok Jae-eun's, he was gripped by a sense of overwhelming pressure, and he unknowingly lowered his head. Swish. Mok Jae-eun simply passed by him as if no one was there. This was truly humiliating. Nevertheless, Yubong felt miserable at the sight of himself, feeling relieved for a moment. Tap. Mok Jae-eun stood in front of Lady Sio, leaving about 3 steps between them. Tremble. As Mok Jae-eun finally stood before her, she felt the strength drain from her legs as if she would collapse at any moment. Seeing him up close, his appearance was exceptionally handsome, but that didn't register in her mind. Only the blood-staining Mok Jiongun's hands caught her eye. Ugh. He felt like vomiting from the revulsion. She felt like tears would come out, but she was barely holding them back. To her, Mok Jiongun spoke. Those who are full tend to have their memories and emotions of hunger diluted. What are you saying? Of course that can happen. Humans are simpler than you think, so they easily forget such memories. So, I simply reminded you of those lacking emotions through a suitable example. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jiongun reached out his hand towards her. Eek. Lady Seo flinched and unknowingly closed her eyes tightly. Was he going to harm her as well? Swish. But Mok Jiongun brushed her disheveled hair to the side and spoke in a gentle voice. Your Majesty, do you know what those lacking emotions are? At Mok Jiongun's question, she trembled and cautiously opened her eyes slightly. As she opened her eyes, she saw Mok Jiongun's face filled with nothing but malice. Seeing this, she couldn't control her trembling. She had felt the emotions directed at her through the eyes of countless people. But this was the first time she had experienced something like this. How could a human being be filled with such malice? Just looking at it was too frightening. Please spare me. Unable to overcome this fear, a plea finally spilled from her lips. To her, Mok Jiongun smiled and said, Fear, desperation, earnestness. Good. It seems those lacking things have been filled now. At Mok Jiongun's words, she realized. The death of her close associate Ping Iman, the cruelty of ripping off his head. All these actions were to remind and imprint the emotion of fear in her, who had become arrogant after becoming the imperial noble consort. Just for that reason. But even if she realized this, nothing would change. This fear, once imprinted, wasn't something that could be easily undone. To be freed from this bondage, there were only two options. Either kill this man who had imprinted this emotion on her or die herself. It was one of the two. But how can I kill this man? At that moment something came to her mind. It was, Your Majesty, the Ping family and the Righteous Alliance will protect you from this wicked heaven and earth society no matter what. The words Ping Iman had spoken before he died. That's right. Ping Iman was a member of the Hebei Ping family and belonged to the Righteous Alliance. She knew that the Righteous Alliance, formed by the warriors of the orthodox martial world, had a grudge against the wicked heaven and earth society. If they found out about Ping Iman's death, they would never let it slide. Grip. She clenched her teeth. Just endure a little. Endure this moment of fear and humiliation and surely Revan. Boom. At that moment, the closed door of the rear garden was shattered by something and toppled forward. Everyone's attention simultaneously turned towards it. Perhaps. Had the long-awaited support from the Ping family's experts and soldiers finally arrived? But the complexion of the leader of Eastern Depot, who was looking towards the main gate of the rear garden, wasn't good. That was because there was hardly any presence. If hundreds of soldiers and experts from the Ping family had arrived, many presences should have been felt, but something was off. But someone revealed themselves through the toppled door. It was none other than Sir Peng. Peng Sukaim, Ping Iman's younger brother and an expert of the Hebei Ping family. At his appearance, the warriors' expressions brightened, thinking that support had finally arrived. But something was strange. Peng Sukaim's clothes were stained red, and in his hand was a sword with a strange pattern they had never seen before, soaked in blood. Drip drip. Could it be that there was an ambush set by the Heaven and Earth Society outside? Otherwise, how could he appear alone in such a state? As they were puzzled, Peng Sukaim scanned his surroundings with crazed eyes, then soon discovered Lady Seo in the pavilion and raised the corners of his mouth sharply. At this, the leader shouted, Sir Peng, what on earth happened outside? Shut up, you castrated bastard. At his shout, the leader's expression stiffened. He had tried to ask what had happened outside, but he was suddenly cursed at. As he was baffled, Peng Sukaim spat out unexpected words towards Lady Seo in the pavilion. Your Majesty, are you prepared to moan in ecstasy in my arms tonight? Chapter 229, Desire. 2. Your Majesty, are you prepared to moan in ecstasy in my arms tonight? No one had anticipated this. How could such brazen and vulgar words come out of Peng Sukaim, who could be considered Lady Seo's closest confidant as the younger brother of Magistrate Ping Iman, unless he had gone mad? Even Lady Seo was utterly dumbfounded by the shock. She had high expectations for the Hubei Ping family. They were the escape route that would sever her ties with the Heaven and Earth Society, who had supported her but ultimately wanted to control her as they wished. But a situation had unfolded that shattered those expectations. Thud 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 thud. The leader of Eastern Depot, who had been exchanging blows with Siep Chun, created some distance and then pressed, unable to contain his anger. Pungsukam, have you truly gone insane? How dare you speak so disrespectfully to Her Majesty? Before he could even finish speaking, Pungsukam walked towards the pavilion, letting out a madness-filled laugh. Hee hee hee. Just by looking at this, one could tell how out of his mind he was. Thus, the warriors blocked him as he tried to approach the pavilion. Sir Peng, stop right there. If you try to come any closer, we'll have no choice but to take action. Xing. Those who drew their weapons assumed a starting posture. Seeing them like this, Pungsukam scoffed and spoke. Take action? Do you think the likes of you can stop me? Well, if you think you can, give it a try. But you'll have to stake your lives. With those words, Pungsukam continued walking forward without stopping. Step. He had only taken a single step, but the warriors flinched. That was because the thick murderous intent and unknown ominous energy emanating from Pungsukam was pressuring them. Stop. Make me stop. Hey. Attack. Thud thud thud. In the end, although somewhat intimidated by his aura, the warriors simultaneously launched themselves to stop Pungsukam, who wasn't halting. Skilled in collaborative attacks, the three warriors each aimed for Pungsukam's vital points. But at that very moment, swish. The instant they entered his range, Pungsukam's sword widely slashed the surrounding space and brushed past the warriors. The three people who had been thrusting their swords towards Pungsukam simultaneously stopped in their tracks. The warriors' faces were filled with shock and horror. How? Slice. Soon their bodies split apart, dividing into upper and lower halves. Thud. The sight of them squirming on the ground was truly gruesome. Blood gushed like a fountain from their severed lower bodies. Spurt. As three warriors were halved in an instant, the warriors on Lady Xiao's side couldn't hide their shock. Pungsukam was the younger brother of Ping Yimun, a close associate of Lady Xiao, so he was a reliable ally to them. But in the end he had cut them down. As everyone was in an uproar, the eyes of a few turned not to the dead warriors but to the strange patterned sword Pungsukam was holding. The evil commandment sword? How does he have the Lord's sword? It was Mong Muyak and Siep Chun. They realized that the sword Pungsukam was holding was the evil commandment sword. The evil commandment sword was a legendary demonic sword crafted by the great swordsmith Oyezi. Come to think of it, before entering this rear garden, they had entrusted their weapons to the soldiers at the entrance of the restaurant. It seemed he had touched the sword then. Has he been possessed by the sword's demonic energy? Otherwise there was no way he would display such madness. The evil commandment sword was also a demonic sword, so they had expected it to be somewhat dangerous. But seeing even an expert near the pinnacle stage of transcendent realm becoming possessed by its demonic energy, its evil nature seemed no ordinary matter. It wasn't a sword to be touched lightly. Mong Muyak, who had coveted the evil commandment sword, inwardly recalled his time in the Heaven and Earth Society and felt relieved. That sword wasn't something unqualified individuals could recklessly desire. Right at that moment, Pat, the leader of Eastern Depot, blocked the path of Pungsukam, who continued walking towards the pavilion without stopping even after cutting down the warriors. The leader assumed the starting posture of his claw technique and glanced at the sword Pungsukam was holding. As an expert of the transcendent realm, he could tell with a single glance that the sword wasn't ordinary. I sensed some demonic energy. It was detestable. Thus the leader spoke in a low voice. Sir Peng, put down that sword at once and back away. However, there was no way Pungsukam would retreat in the face of such a warning. He scoffed and continued walking forward. At this, the leader shouted, Pungsukam, I told you to back away at once. In response to his shout, Pungsukam sneered and spoke. A castrated bastard dares to run his mouth. Grit. At those words, the leader's expression twisted fiercely. The eunuchs who entered the palace were all castrated. That was because the only men allowed inside the palace were members of the imperial family. Thus, eunuchs became neither male nor female through castration. However, it wasn't as if they simply liked or were satisfied with their reality. Naturally, if mocked and provoked by being called a eunuch, they would get angry. You bastard! Unable to endure being called a eunuch twice, the leader launched himself first. Knowing that Ping Sukhime's martial prowess was a step above his brother Ping Iman, the leader unleashed his ultimate technique with full power from the start. Sunflower Hanging Claw, 8th technique, Bloody Waves and Corpses. It was a technique of certain death, an ultimate move meant to surely kill the opponent. Thud 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 thud. The leader's claw technique, rippling with blue true energy, created numerous claw shadows with a momentum like waves, engulfing Ping Sukhime. The force was so strong that wind pressure arose in the surroundings. Not bad for a castrated bastard. But as long as I have this sword, you can't defeat me. Grip. Peng Sukhime tightly grasped the sword handle and concentrated his inner energy. As energy gathered, a blue sword aura formed. Along with this, Peng Sukhime unleashed his sword technique. Chaotic Thunder Sword. Thunder Harmony. Rumble Boom. With a sound like a thunderbolt striking, the single slash Peng Sukhime unleashed bent like blue lightning, clashing with the leader's wave-like claw technique. Thud 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 thud. As the ultimate techniques of the two transcendent experts collided, the aftermath of the true energy scattered in all directions. The ground where the true energy struck shattered, creating chaos. Crackle. Boom. Boom. Ugh. Be back away. Those nearby had to hurriedly create distance in a state of panic. At a glance, they seemed evenly matched. However, the leader's complexion wasn't good. Is this truly a technique with the same roots? Originally, the Chaotic Thunder Sword was the saber art called Chaotic Thunder Saber. But it was Peng Sukhime who had adapted it into a sword technique, and its power and variations surpassed even the Chaotic Thunder Saber, which could be considered the original. The leader, who had experienced the techniques of the Chaotic Thunder Saber through sparring with Ping Iman, could clearly feel this. Moreover, even though I'm protecting myself with true energy, it feels like my hands will be torn off. He was enduring it with great effort, but the wounds on his hands were gradually increasing. Although it was the same true energy, unlike him who unleashed the technique with bare hands, Peng Sukhime had the power of a famous sword added, further maximizing its sharpness. Swish swish swish. The leader's figure was being pushed back more and more. Siep Chun, who had been quietly observing this, had a glint in his eyes. Tao's the chance. If he intervened now, it seemed he could retrieve the Lord's evil commandment sword without much effort. Just as he was about to make a move, a voice reached his ears. Leave it be. Lord. Siep Chun glanced at Mok Jiongun with puzzled eyes. The unique weapon had fallen into Peng Sukhime's hands, so why was he telling him to just leave it? He couldn't understand, but his lord's orders were absolute. Thus, Siep Chun didn't intervene. In the meantime, the clash of techniques between Peng Sukhime and the leader reached a conclusion. Thud. Slash. Unable to withstand the might of the sword technique, an opening appeared, and Peng Sukhime swiftly slashed the leader's side without missing the chance. Fortunately, it didn't cut deep enough to reach his internal organs, but as the sharp sword energy penetrated, the leader, unable to endure the pain, fell to one knee. Thud. Arg. Leader. Seeing him like this, Lady Xiao cried out in a desperate voice. The leader of Eastern Depot was the only close associate who could protect her. But he had been defeated. At this rate, there was no one among her subordinates who could stop that man. You castrated bastard. I'll let you live for a bit, so watch carefully from there. Today I'll show you that bitch Xiao Yonghyo lying beneath me, panting and begging. Why, you bastard? The leader, clutching his side, endured the pain and tried to stop Peng Sukhime. But with an injured body, there was no way that would happen. Peng Sukhime kicked the chin of the leader who was trying to grab him. Thwack. Ack. The leader, who was hit in the jaw, let out a short scream and spat blood as he tumbled to the ground. Peng Sukhime, who had knocked him down, advanced towards the pavilion without hesitation. Step step. What are you doing? Stop him at once. The eunuch Yubong pressed the warriors, but to no avail. None of the warriors stepped forward to stop him. They were too afraid of death. As it seemed hopeless, Yubong finally shouted, looking at the advance and rear parties of the Heaven and Earth Society. Brother gone. Brother okay. Please help. If Her Majesty is violated, you won't be able to proceed with your mission either. However, despite his request, no one stepped forward. Ganyang and Okivai, whom he had known for a long time, remained still as if they hadn't heard, and Sip Chun and Mong Muyak of the rear party also just watched with their arms crossed, as if it wasn't their business. Wise choices. Peng Sukheim, consumed by desire and madness, also seemed to have no intention of going out of his way to fight them, so he just passed by. His mind was filled with nothing but the thought of violating Lady Xiao. As he approached her, his desire had already swelled to its limit, and his lower body had also greatly bulged. Grip. Seeing this, Lady Xiao bit her lip hard as if it was humiliating. She had trusted the Hubei Ping family so much. But how could such a man transform into a brazen lecher? No matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't understand. Thus, she looked at Mok Jiongun standing beside her and asked, "What on earth did you do?" At that question, Mok Jiongun shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I don't know what you're talking about." The younger brother of Magistrate Ping may be somewhat frivolous in his behavior, but as a member of the orthodox martial world, he knows how to keep his word. And that's how he was when I first saw him. But his current appearance was vastly different from usual. Those filthy eyes were filled with nothing but madness and desire. At these words, Mok Jiongun smiled and said, "Do you think I did something to him? Then are you saying you didn't?" "Yes, that's right." "Then why is Peng Sukheim?" "You're mistaken. That is Peng Sukheim's true desire." "What?" "Those possessed by the demonic energy of the evil commandment sword reveal their true desires, their hidden thoughts." "Desire? What the hell are you talking about?" "Coincidentally, shall we call it karma?" "Karma. When I entered this place, I warned the soldiers collecting the weapons. I told them my sword was a cursed demon sword, so it was dangerous and they should never draw it." "What nonsense is this?" Lady Xiao couldn't easily believe Mok Jiongun's words. How could a person reveal their desires or inner thoughts just by grasping a sword? At that moment, Yubong, who was in front of the pavilion, hurriedly turned his head and spoke. "Why, Your Majesty? If that sword is truly the evil commandment sword, it is indeed a legendary demonic sword." "It's really a legendary demonic sword?" She furrowed her brows in confusion. There was no way Yubong, her own eunuch, would lie about this. Moreover, hadn't he even betrayed the Heaven and Earth Society? Step. Just then Peng Sukheim, who had reached right in front of the pavilion, spoke with a madness-filled laugh. "He, Xiao Yonghyo. I finally have you in my arms." Shudder. At these words, goosebumps rose all over Lady Xiao's body. She had considered the orthodox martial artists to be honorable warriors, unlike the wicked Heaven and Earth Society. That's why she had also wanted to cut ties with the Heaven and Earth Society and switch to them. But if the hidden desire of a man who claimed to be righteous was to lust after her body, in the end, they weren't much different. Overcome by disappointment more than fear, she said to Mok Jiongun, "Help me." "You want me to help you?" "I will never ask for help or join hands with the righteous faction or others again. So please, protect me from that man." "Well." At Mok Jiongun's words, she looked at him in disbelief. Then what the hell was she supposed to do here? As she was baffled, Mok Jiongun sneered. "Ah, at this rate your Majesty's body will be violated by that man's filthy thing." "You." How could she not know that? In the end, desperate with fear, she spoke as if pleading. What do you want?" At this, Mok Jiongun raised the corners of his mouth sharply, as if he had been waiting, and replied briefly. Submission. Chapter 230 Desire 3. Submit. Imperial Consort Xiao's eyes trembled like crazy. She knew he wanted something, but she never expected him to demand it so blatantly. This bastard dares. No matter how cornered she was the imperial concubine. For a mere ruffian from the martial arts world to tell her, the mother of the crown prince of this nation, to submit to him? How could he say such a thing unless he was truly insane? If she had to die, she would rather die than submit to such a bastard just to save her life. "You can't go to Her Majesty." At that moment the eunuch Yubong blocked Peng Sukheim, who was consumed by madness and desire. However, bam bam bam. Ugh. Thud. Yubong was hit in the chest and abdomen by Peng Sukheim's lightning-fast punches and fell to his knees. Yubong, who couldn't even match Assistant Commander Zhang from the Eastern Depot, had no chance of standing up to Peng Sukheim. Even without using a sword, he was no match for him with his bare hands. Peng Sukam kicked the head of Yubong who was kneeling and sneered. Thud. Ack. A eunuch brat dares to act up. After easily knocking down Yubong, Peng Sukam looked at Imperial Consort Xiao, licking his tongue and said, Xiao Yonghyo. Let's see that beautiful flesh of yours. With bloodshot eyes and heavy breathing, Peng Sukam, seeing his appearance filled with desire, Imperial Consort Xiao unknowingly took a step back. Many men had coveted her over the years, but since it was inside the palace, they had maintained a minimum level of courtesy and didn't utter such vulgar words. She felt extremely humiliated and frightened. Peng Sukam, do you think you'll get away with this? Get away. What does that matter? Xiao Yonghyo, once you taste this thing all night, you'll never be able to escape from it. Peng Sukam fondled his swollen manhood and said. Seeing this, she turned her head away in disgust. Was this the true desire and nature of that man? It was too filthy. If she were to be violated by such a man, she felt like biting her tongue and dying. At this, she said to Mok Jong-un, Didn't you say you would grant all my wishes? Mok Jong-un. Seeing Mok Jong-un ignore her, she bit her lower lip until it bled. What kind of bastard was he? Imperial Consort Xiao shouted desperately. Are you even human? Do you intend to just leave a weak woman to be violated by that bastard? She appealed to his humanity. She had no intention of giving Mok Jong-un what he wanted. At this, Peng Sukam, who was approaching, glanced at Mok Jong-un and burst into laughter, saying, Ha! Are you asking a mere gigolo-like twerp for help? Even though he was consumed by madness and desire, his perception was still sharp. In his eyes, Mok Jong-un seemed like a young lad who was merely at the peak level. It was ridiculous to see her seeking help from such a young lad. Swish. Peng Sukam aimed his evil commandment sword at Mok Jong-un and said, Hey kid, want to try blocking it? In response to his threat, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and stepped aside, replying, Swish. Of course not. Do as you wish. You bastard. Seeing this, Imperial Consort Xiao was dumbfounded and at a loss. Was he really going to just watch her, the mother of the crown prince and the noblest person in this country, be violated by such a lowly bastard? To her who was in distress, Mok Jong-un smirked and said, I wonder if His Majesty the Emperor would like a woman who has been violated by another man. The moment she heard these words, her expression stiffened. She had only considered this moment to be humiliating, but upon hearing Mok Jong-un's words, various thoughts swirled in her mind. If the Emperor found out that she had been taken by this bastard, he would be furious. That fury might not just end with this bastard but extend to her and the crown prince who had been defiled. Then everything would end in catastrophe. No. Just thinking about it was utterly horrifying. At this, Imperial Consort Xiao wrapped her arms around her body and shouted at the approaching Peng Sukam. Don't come. If you come, I'll bite my tongue and kill myself. Kill yourself. Pot. At that moment, Peng Sukam, who had been slowly walking and enjoying her frightened appearance, instantly closed the distance with a body movement technique and sealed her acupoints. Tap 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 tap. Her body instantly stiffened. Gasp. That can't happen. I've been looking forward to this moment for so long. Don't worry. I've made it so that only enough strength remains in your mouth to bite your tongue. What? Since we're doing it anyway, wouldn't your wailing and screaming excite my thing even more? At his vulgar words, Imperial Consort Xiao's face contorted in humiliation. Hee. Rip. However, as if enjoying even this sight, Peng Sukam laughed and tore her luxurious outer garment, revealing her white flesh and undergarments. Unable to endure the shame as her clothes were torn, tears welled up in Imperial Consort Xiao's eyes. It was too humiliating. Was she going to be violated by such a lowly bastard? She looked at Mok Jong-un with trembling eyes. Imperial Consort Xiao was at a loss for words when she saw Mok Jong-un looking at her with an expressionless face. Was that bastard really human? How could he have such an emotionless gaze even after seeing this? Grip. At that moment, Peng Sukam grabbed her undergarment and the fabric covering her chest at the same time. It seemed he was trying to tear them off at once and completely expose her upper body. Even after seeing this, Mok Jong-un showed no particular reaction, standing with his arms crossed. He was like an evil spirit with no humanity at all. How could the rain I encountered be from these bastards? It was truly a situation of being caught between a rock and a hard place. Being violated by this filthy bastard and being cast out by the emperor, or submitting and becoming subservient to that evil-like bastard. Both were the worst-case scenarios. Rip. At that moment her upper undergarment and the fabric covering her chest were completely torn off. Along with it her voluptuous upper body was revealed. Seeing her white and elastic appearance, unbelievable for a body that had given birth, Peng Sukheim licked his tongue and drooled. Unable to move, she was fixed in place, her face flushed with shame as she shed tears. Her appearance further excited Peng Sukheim. Hee. Grip. Ah. Peng Sukheim roughly grabbed one of her breasts, and his other hand was already heading towards her lower body. At this, Imperial Consort Xiao finally shouted in desperation. I'll do it. I'll do as you say, so kill this bastard right now. At her outcry, Peng Sukheim sneered and said, no matter how desperate the great Imperial Consort Xiao Yonghyo is, to ask this lowly one to kill me truly. You heard her, right? At that moment, hearing the voice from behind, Peng Sukheim snorted. Then, grasping the hilt of the evil commandment sword with his right hand, he turned his head towards Mok Jeongeun and said, Kid, this is your last chance. I'm in a great mood since I'm about to have a grand affair, so I'll let it slide just this once. Get lost right now. That might be difficult. Difficult? Ha. At this, Peng Sukheim got up. Then, turning his body and aiming his sword at Mok Jeongeun, he said in a low voice, you must be crazy wanting to die. You gigolo-like bastard. You're out of luck. What? If you hadn't coveted someone else's sword recklessly, none of this would have happened. What nonsense are you spouting? With a shout, Peng Sukheim swung the evil commandment sword towards Mok Jeongeun's neck. It was so fast that it seemed to separate the head from the body in an instant. However, smack. Peng Sukheim's eyes widened. That's because Mok Jeongeun's palm had blocked the blade. What on earth? Huang. At that moment, the blade of the evil commandment sword, which had touched Mok Jeongeun's palm, trembled and emitted a sword cry. At this, Peng Sukheim, who was consumed by desire and madness, couldn't hide his surprise. The sword was reacting to this young lad as if it were alive. The sword is resonating? What was happening? Now please return my sword. Your sword. Yes. At those words, Peng Sukheim frowned fiercely and shouted, don't spout nonsense. The sword is mine. It's not something a kid like you can covet. Pot. With that, Peng Sukheim removed the blade from Mok Jeongeun's hand and tried to unleash a sword technique. However, crackle. At that moment, the blood vessels on the back of Peng Sukheim's hand holding the hilt of the evil commandment sword bulged, and he couldn't control the inner energy of his hand as if he were possessed. Ugh. Unable to endure the pain, Peng Sukheim involuntarily released the hilt from his hand. Stab. The evil commandment sword, which had fallen from his hand, stuck into the ground and stood upright. The blade trembled on its own, and Peng Sukheim had an expression of utter incomprehension at this sight. Why is it rejecting me? Although it was a demonic sword, he believed the sword had chosen him. However, the sword was clearly rejecting him. At that moment, Mok Jeongeun grasped the hilt of the evil commandment sword, which was standing upright on the ground, and pulled it out. Huang. The sword cry grew louder and light flowed from the blade. Seeing this, Peng Sukheim's eyes trembled. Did this bastard really receive the choice of this demonic sword? Then farewell. What? Before he could even finish his question, Peng Sukheim, realizing that something sharp had brushed past his neck, was startled and grabbed his neck with both hands. Smack. Then Mok Jeongeun lightly swung the blade of the evil commandment sword to shake off the blood. Seeing this, despair filled Peng Sukheim's eyes. Ignoring him, Mok Jeongeun approached Imperial Consort Xiao, who was immobilized on the ground, and released the sealed acupoints. Tap 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 tap. With her acupoints released, she was startled and wrapped her arms around her chest. It was humiliating, but her resentment towards Peng Sukheim was greater, so she glared at him and said, why didn't you kill him? I did kill him. You killed him? Yes. What are you talking about? Isn't he still alive and well? Peng Sukheim, who was clutching his neck and looking anxious, was still alive. At this, Mok Jeongeun chuckled and approached him. Peng Sukheim moved his eyes from side to side, showing signs of rejection. However, Mok Jae-un ignored this and placed his finger on his forehead, flicking it. Tap. Then. Slide. Peng Sukheim's head, which he had been barely holding, slid back and fell. Thud. Splat. As the head hit the ground, blood gushed out like a fountain from the cross-section of the severed neck. Seeing this, Imperial Consort Sio's eyes became dazed. Although he was a vile bastard who had tried to violate her, seeing his decapitated corpse right in front of her made her feel like she was going to lose her mind. Monster. This bastard is a real monster. The eunuch Yubong, who had been holding his broken nose, clicked his tongue inwardly. He hadn't even seen the sword cutting the neck properly. Moreover, even the person himself only realized it after being cut, hastily grabbing his severed neck. It was truly a ghostly swordsmanship. Shocked inwardly like that, the eunuch Yubong hurriedly ran to Imperial Consort Sio and covered her with his outer garment. Ugh. Imperial Consort Sio trembled and wrapped herself in Yubong's clothes. Although it was better than seeing the severed head of Peng Sukheim's older brother Peng Yimun, it was still equally disgusting. At this, Yubong carefully said to Mok Jae-un, "Her Majesty is having a hard time, so can you give us some time by changing the location? That's not difficult." Hearing this, Yubong inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. By naturally changing the location like this and entrusting Imperial Consort Sio to the palace maids, he should stay out of their sight for a while. Having betrayed them, there seemed to be no benefit in lingering in front of them. "Then I'll escort Her Majesty for a moment." "Ah, I almost forgot." "Pardon?" To his questioning, Mok Jae-un shook his head. "I'm not talking to you." At this, Imperial Consort Sio, trembling, looked at him in confusion. What did he almost forget? Then Mok Jae-un smiled brightly and said, "Since you promised to submit, I thought I'd show you the end of a traitor." As soon as those words were spoken, Yubong was startled and tried to say something to Mok Jae-un. "Lord Mok, I am also loyal to you." Before he could even finish his sentence, in the blink of an eye, Mok Jae-un's sword was already above Yubong's head. Yubong's eyes widened as if they would tear. Then, slide. A vertical red line appeared in the middle of his face. Imperial Consort Sio slowly turned her head to the side with trembling eyes. As she turned her head, blood flowed from the red line, and Yubong's body was split in half with a splat. Blood spurting from the split body drenched her. Splat. Stiffened by fear, she couldn't move a muscle. Mok Jae-un gently stroked the blood-soaked cheek of Imperial Consort Sio and softly said, "I believe you will conduct yourself well." Chapter 231 You Desire 4. On the way back to the inn, the attitudes of Ganyang and OKGI from the advance party changed. Originally, they were already wary of the rear party, but after witnessing Mok Jae-un's true colors as he dealt with even Lady Sio, one of the absolute rulers of this nation, they treated him completely like a superior. In fact, what was most deeply imprinted in their minds was the image of the traitorous Yubong, who had been split in half and turned into a cold corpse. Let's not provoke him. Who knows what might happen if we get on his bad side. Even Okidai, who had once vowed to take revenge, had long since abandoned such thoughts. He just hoped to avoid irritating Mok Jae-un until the mission was completed. As they were heading towards the inn, Mok Jae-un spoke to them at a fork in the road. "I have a brief errand to run, so you all go ahead first." "My lord, I will escort you." Sip Chun stepped forward to guard Mok Jae-un. But Mok Jae-un shook his head. "It's nothing important, so please go ahead and wait inside." "Are you sure it's all right?" "Yes, I'm just going to take a look around." "Ah, you must mean that place." At these words, Sip Chun realized where Mok Jae-un was heading. He was likely going to the workshop of Miss Songa, the real master artisan of human skin masks. Having confirmed his intentions, Sip Chun backed down. After Mok Jae-un left, quite some time passed. As they were about to reach the inn, Ganyang carefully spoke. "Brother Sip. What is it? But is it really okay to end it like this?" "What do you mean by okay?" "I'm talking about Lady Sio." "Lady Sio?" "Yes. Although Lord Mok wrapped things up well, what if Lady Sio has a change of heart along the way?" In fact, this had been Ganyang's concern all along. Mok Jae-un may have imprinted fear in that arrogant Lady Sio, but from her perspective she had been thoroughly humiliated. She may have shown submission to Mok Jae-un now to survive, but once she returned to the palace, her attitude could change. You don't need to worry about that, Mong Muyak interjected. What do you mean there's no need to worry? Swish. Mong Muyak raised his arm to show them. The iron chain bracelet that should have been there was missing. The reason was simple. Mok Jung-un had removed the chain of loyalty he had been wearing and put it on Lady Seo, receiving her oath of submission. As long as she wears that bracelet, Lady Seo absolutely cannot betray the Lord. What the hell are you talking about? You'll find out soon. And don't try to understand everything. Mong Muyak was the only one who had experienced the chain of loyalty. Those who wore it could never harbor any ill intentions towards the one they had sworn allegiance to. Doing so could even cost them their life. Hee. Mong Muyak was extremely pleased to have the chain of loyalty removed thanks to Lady Seo. It had been too painful, as it would tighten around his wrist and cause agony even if he harbored the slightest malicious thoughts towards Mok Jung-un. You'll be able to behave well even without this, right? I will serve you with all my heart. Please trust me. Mong Muyak had once again sworn loyalty to Mok Jung-un. Through his experiences with Mok Jung-un, he had come to believe that perhaps he could even surpass the eldest young master Na Yul-riang and become the successor, leading him to have a change of heart. Because of this, he now genuinely viewed Mok Jung-un as his lord. Seop Chun patted Ganyong's back and said, as Muyak said, don't worry too much. Moreover, with this incident, Lady Seo is also in a difficult position, so she has no choice but to comply. A rock in a hard place. It was the phrase that best described Lady Seo's current situation. Apart from swearing submission to Mok Jung-un, she now had to distance herself from the righteous faction voluntarily. Peng Suk-im, the younger brother of Magistrate Ping Imun, had attempted to violate her in front of everyone, and on top of that he had even massacred the soldiers of the Imperial Army stationed in Kaifeng. Because of this, she had no choice but to sever ties with the Hebei Ping family, if only to handle the aftermath. Thus, from Lady Seo's perspective, no matter how unpleasant it was, she had to maintain her relationship with Mok Jung-un and the Heaven and Earth Society. Unintentionally, thanks to our Lord, those bastards from the Righteous Alliance are about to get scared shitless. Ha ha ha. The Hebei Ping family was one of the 7 great clans and a key pillar of the Righteous Alliance. Thinking about the blow they would suffer, Seop Chun, as a member of the Heaven and Earth Society, felt delighted. At the same time, Leafy Wind Guest Inn, located in the western commercial district of Kaifeng. Normally, it would be a time when the inn would still be bustling with customers drinking alcohol, but the interior was exceptionally quiet. That was because the restaurant had been reserved by several groups who appeared to be martial artists. On the first floor, there were martial artists from the Hebei Ping family wearing military uniforms with Ping family embroidered on their chests. There was also a group from Mount Hua sect, dressed in light blue robes with plum blossom patterns. Lastly, there was a group from Mount Zhongnan sect, wearing light gray robes with bright red belts, all quietly having a meal together. The elders of the 2 sects and 1 clan leading these groups were engaged in conversation, seated at a round table on the 2nd floor. The middle-aged man with a mustache sitting on the left was Peng Il-hyun, the clan head of the Hebei Ping family, known as the Hegemon Saber of Hebei. Peng Il-hyun heartily laughed and poured a cup of alcohol for the person directly across from him. Haha. Sir Gu Yongjia is truly magnanimous. Even if it's a bet between elders to actually teach the secret art of your sect, the 14 plum blossom sword technique, to a disciple of another sect, the Kong Tong sect. Ahem. At his words, the old Taoist priest in a blue robe with sharp features, receiving the cup, coughed as if displeased. He was Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect, one of the 9 great sects that could be considered the backbone of the Righteous Alliance. Ho ho. Clan head Ping, don't say that. If you keep going, how upset will Elder Gu Yongjia be? The old man in a robe with a warm demeanor and graying hair, sitting to the right of Peng Il-hyun, spoke. He was true person Jian Munjia of Mount Zhongnan sect. True person comes from the term, or Zhenren. Let me know if you know better term to name this aside from true person. At Jian Munjia's words, Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect spoke in a nonchalant voice. If I was upset, how could I have taught the martial art? It's all that child's fortune. His talent was simply that outstanding. Outstanding is an understatement. To completely grasp the essence of the 14 plum blossom sword technique in just the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, he can be called a genius without exaggeration. At true person Jian Munja's words, the eyes of Ping Ailhian, the Ping family's clan head, widened. In just the time to drink a cup of tea? That's right. He truly has a brilliant mind. My, if that's true, it's amazing. For a highly skilled swordsman, it wasn't impossible. However, he had heard that the disciple of the Kong Tong sect had just become an official disciple after being a lay disciple. If such a child had mastered a first-rate sword art of another sect in just the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, he could indeed be considered a great talent. Curious, Peng Ailhian asked, "What is the Taoist name of that disciple from the Kong Tong sect?" Although he was accepted as an official disciple, he wasn't registered with a Taoist name, so as far as I know, he doesn't have one. Is that so? Then his name. Could it be that clan head Ping covets that child from the Kong Tong sect? Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect asked in a nonchalant voice. At that question, Peng Ailhian waved his hands and politely replied, "No, of course not. How could I covet an official disciple of the Kong Tong sect?" While saying this, Peng Ailhian surreptitiously glanced at Elder Gu Yongjia's face. No matter how he looked at it, the old man seemed to be wary of him. I see. He had already thought it was difficult to see Elder Gu Yongjia's unhesitating transmission of the Mount Hua sect's sword art to a disciple of another sect as mere magnanimity, even if it was called a bet. It seemed he also coveted that child. For a true person of a Taoist sect, he was unexpectedly greedy. But it was understandable. If the child possessed such talent, anyone would want him as a disciple. If my second son receives a recommendation letter from Lady Xiao to participate in the Imperial Guard's martial arts competition this time, I should instruct him to keep an eye on that child from the Kong Tong sect. One never knows what might happen. Just then, Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect opened his mouth. But seeing clan head Ping come to Kaifeng in person, it seems the efforts of your younger brother, who serves as a magistrate in the palace, have borne fruit. At his words, Peng Ailhian's eyes narrowed. As expected of Mount Hua sect, known as one of the pillars of the 9 great sects alongside Wudong sect, their information network was no ordinary matter. The Righteous Alliance had long supported the second prince, Prince Zhang, who was considered the most likely candidate for crown prince. However, contrary to that support and expectation, the young son of Lady Xiao had ascended to the position of crown prince. Since then, Peng Ailhian, the clan head of the Hebei Ping family, had been in contact with Lady Xiao through his younger brother Ping Yimun, who held an official position in the palace. Before the old men of the alliance interfere, I need to further solidify my relationship with Lady Xiao. If today's matter was resolved smoothly, it would be achieved. Lady Xiao had wanted to sever ties with the Heaven and Earth Society since becoming the mother of the crown prince. If this matter was successfully resolved, not only would he gain the trust of Lady Xiao, but he could also surpass the old fogies of the alliance who were clinging to a rotten lifeline and even aim for the position of the next alliance leader. Just thinking about it, he couldn't contain his excitement. However, he didn't want to provoke the scrutiny of these old fogies yet, so he calmly said without revealing his thoughts, "No, my younger brother has simply fulfilled his duties in his official position." Ho ho, you're so humble. Isn't your clan's matter also the alliance's matter? If the Ping family's affairs go well and you even obtain a recommendation letter from Lady Xiao for the Imperial Guard's martial arts competition, the influence of our alliance will grow even greater. How can this not be a good thing? Peng Ailhian clicked his tongue inwardly. Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect had already seen through more than half of his plan. He was truly an old man who couldn't be taken lightly. He needed to quickly gain strength. He couldn't let the Righteous Alliance continue to revolve solely around the 9 great sects and one clan. It was at that moment. Tap 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 tap. Someone hurriedly ran up to the second floor where they were. Peng Ailhian, the Ping family's clan head, Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua sect, and true person Jian Munjia of Mount Zhongnan sect turned their heads to look at the person. However, upon seeing the person, Peng Ailhian frowned with a look of bewilderment. That was because the one who had come up was none other than the senior warrior of the Ping family's outer hall. The clan head Peng Ailhian couldn't help but be baffled by the sudden appearance of the person he had sent to assist his third younger brother Ping Sukaim for the mission, covered in blood. Huff huff, see clan head. I have an urgent report. What on earth happened? Something felt ominous. By now he thought the matter would have been wrapped up. The senior warrior of the outer hall hurriedly approached clan head Peng Alhayan and whispered, "Please change locations for a moment." At those words, Peng Alhayan looked puzzled, but soon excused himself to Elder Gu Yongjia of Mount Hua and true person Jian Munjia of Mount Zhongnan, and moved to the outer area of the second floor. Nevertheless, the senior warrior of the outer hall whispered in his ear, "Clan head, you must leave Kaifeng immediately." "What are you talking about? Leave Kaifeng? Something terrible has happened." "What? Don't tell me our clan's warriors were defeated. It's even more serious than that. If we don't hurry, you may face great trouble." "Face great trouble? What the hell are you saying?" Clan head Peng Alhayan's voice rose. Could it be that they had been counterattacked by the Heaven and Earth Society bastards? But even if they had been counterattacked and failed the mission, this was Kaifeng, the imperial capital, and he had the remaining forces of the Hebei Ping family with him. If it's because of the Heaven and Earth Society bastards right now? Clan head, it's not because of the Heaven and Earth Society. Then why are you acting like this? Pressed by Peng Alhayan, the senior warrior of the outer hall hesitated before finally speaking. Outer hall master Peng Sukaim has caused a major incident. An incident? What the hell are you talking about? What kind of incident could he have caused in this mission? The mission was simple. At most, it was to suppress the late-stage disciples sent by the Heaven and Earth Society. No matter how outstanding they were just late-stage disciples, and the forces he had prepared were enough to engage in a battle with even a small to medium-sized sect. But the senior warrior of the outer hall uttered words he never expected. Outer hall master Peng Sukaim has massacred most of the clan's warriors and government soldiers who were on standby. At those words, clan head Peng Alhayan's expression stiffened. For a moment he doubted his own ears. What are you saying? Why would Peng Sukaim do such a thing? I don't know. The young master suddenly became crazed like a madman and tried to force his way inside, so we tried to stop him, but that can't be. Peng Alhayan denied it. No matter how much Peng Sukaim indulged in wine and women and had improper conduct, as a member of the righteous faction, he had never crossed that line. Why would the guy do something so absurd? But the problem didn't end there. Clan head. But it's the truth. These wounds of mine were also inflicted by the outer hall master. We shouldn't be doing this. You must leave Kaifeng right now. Otherwise, you may truly face great trouble. No. That can't be. I'll go directly in. You absolutely must not go. What do you mean I can't? If that guy caused an incident, if we don't handle it immediately, everything we've done so far will be for naught. Before he could even finish speaking, the senior warrior of the outer hall revealed the truth with difficulty. The outer hall master tried to forcibly violate Her Majesty the Imperial Noble Consort. The moment he heard those words, clan head Peng Alhayan became dazed like a madman, and his legs seemed to lose strength as he staggered.